World of Warfare presents the Battle of Crete. After the collapse of France in June of 1940, most of Europe was now under Nazi control, fundamentally altering the balance of power on the entire continent, while leaving Great Britain to stand alone against Nazi Germany and its Axis partners. Italy's entry into the war that same month further escalated the conflict in North Africa, the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Balkans, turning the Mediterranean in particular into one of the most complex and fiercely contested theaters by the spring of 1941. Within this volatile cauldron, the Greek Isle of Crete, rugged, mountainous, and strategically placed, would soon become the epicenter of one of the most extraordinary battles of the war. Lying at the crossroads of three major continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, Crete stretches a mere 160 miles from east to west, yet at the time it dominated eastern Mediterranean sea lanes, while sitting astride the air routes linking mainland Greece, North Africa, and the Middle East. From a military standpoint, if the Allies owned the island, Allied air and naval forces could attack Axis shipping lanes in the Aegean Sea, protect Allied supply routes into Egypt, and provide air bases for bombing campaigns against the Romanian oil fields of Ploesti, Germany's most coveted and vital source of petroleum. For Britain in particular, Crete represented both a shield and a dagger, a defensive stronghold protecting Egypt and her vital supply route through the Suez Canal, while offering an offensive forward springboard into southeastern Europe. For Germany, on the other hand, the island represented a potential Allied base of aircraft operations that could disrupt Axis operations in the Balkans and North Africa, made even more important for Germany to possess once Germany committed forces for the invasion of the Soviet Union under Operation Barbarossa. The Battle of Crete would turn out to be less of a conventional land campaign, but instead the first and only time in history that a large island landmass was captured almost entirely through airborne invasion, pitting elite German paratroopers known as the Fallschirmjäger against a disparate Allied force made up of British, Australian, New Zealand, Greek, and Cretan civilian defenders. Its outcome, more importantly, would have profound consequences on airborne warfare, civilian resistance, and the implementation of German military strategy and doctrine for the remainder of the war. The roots of the Battle of Crete lay in the collapse of Allied resistance on the Greek mainland, when in October of 1940, Italy launched a poorly organized invasion of Greece from Albania, only to be driven back by fierce Greek counterattacks. Livid over Italy's failure, and worried about British intervention in the Balkans, Nazi dictator Adolf Hitler made the call to intervene directly to repair the damage caused by Italian dictator Benito Mussolini's failure in Greece, launching Operation Merida in April, which was a planned blitzkrieg invasion of both Yugoslavia and Greece. This time, German armored divisions and mountain troops quickly overwhelmed resistance, breaking through the Metaxas line in northern Greece before driving south toward Athens. In response to Germany's crushing offensive, British, Australian, and New Zealand divisions were unable to halt the advance, when they were subsequently forced into a fighting withdrawal and a desperate evacuation. Over a 6-day period from April 24th to the 30th, the Royal Navy extracted some 50,000 Allied troops from mainland Greece under withering and near-constant Luftwaffe attacks, transporting most of the exhausted and poorly equipped soldiers onto Crete for what most believed was a temporary staging point before redeployment into Egypt. Instead, Crete would become their next battlefield, despite an almost complete lack of heavy guns, tanks, and aircraft. Commanding some 42,000 men, Major General Bernard Freyberg, a decorated New Zealand officer and a Victoria Cross recipient, oversaw British units, elements of New Zealand divisions, Australian brigades, and some 10,000 poorly trained and inadequately armed Greek soldiers. Although the numbers seemed impressive, Freiberg's reality was grim, since many of his non-Greek soldiers lacked rifles, machine guns, or artillery. Anti-aircraft defenses and tanks were thin to non-existent, while the island lacked any notion of air superiority over the Luftwaffe, who were expected to attack from the Greek mainland. In his favor, however, was a Cretan population with a long history of local resistance, who had fought Ottoman rule for centuries and retained a strong cultural sense of armed resistance and independence. Most Cretan civilians own outdated rifles, knives, and agricultural tools fashioned into weapons, which allowed them to play a pivotal role in the German invasion to come. Back in Berlin, Hitler and his German High Command cobbled together one of the most ambitious undertakings of the war, codenamed Operation Mercury, which was conceived primarily by the commander of Germany's airborne forces, General Kurt Student. Student's vision called for an all-out airborne assault that would seize the island's airfields, allowing reinforcements to be flown in before overwhelming the island's defenders through sheer manpower. Made up of hundreds of transport planes, such as the Junkers Ju-52, and supported by the Luftwaffe's bombers, dive bombers, and fighters, Operation Mercury would be conducted by the 7th Flieger Division, which was made up of Fallschirmjäger paratroopers, and the 5th Mountain Division, which would be airlifted in after the airfields were secured. The plan also divided the island into 4 sectors, including Malemi Airfield in the west, Allied headquarters at Hanya, followed by secondary airfields at Rethymno and Heraklion to the east, still under construction by British engineers. As for the Allies, British code breakers at Bletchley Park had previously decrypted German Enigma messages known as Ultra messages that revealed the airborne invasion plans for Operation Mercury, in turn providing Freiberg with a valuable early warning of Germany's plans. However, the intelligence was incomplete and frequently ambiguous to the point of uselessness, leading Freiberg to become convinced that the main German invasion force would involve seaborne landings rather than an airborne assault. In response, Freiberg dispersed his forces along the coastlines of the island, thereby weakening his defenses around each crucial airfield, especially Malemi, a misinterpretation that Freiberg and his men would later come to regret. On the morning of May 20th, 1941, the Battle of Crete opened with one of the largest airborne assaults in world military history, filling the skies over western Crete with German transport planes as paratroopers descended into olive groves, rocky hillsides, and fields under intense Allied fire. Gliders carrying assault troops crash-landed near their objectives, while at Malemi, German paratroopers suffered egregious losses when many were shot while still in the air. Others landed directly into New Zealand defensive positions, wiping out entire units within minutes before or after they hit the ground. A similar scene unfolded at Hania, where German troops were scattered after command structures collapsed due to the deaths of many German officers shortly after they reached the ground. Despite horrific casualties at Malemi and Hania, with more than 2,000 German paratroopers killed, small groups of Fallschirmjäger fought with bold tenacity, forming ad hoc defensive positions while holding out against repeated Allied counterattacks. One of the most unexpected aspects of the battle was the mass participation of Cretan civilians, who attacked German paratroopers with hunting knives and rifles, farm tools, and even stones, slaughtering entire units of paratroopers where they landed or dragged them away for execution. For the defenders, the civilian resistance boosted morale and helped contain isolated German units during the crucial early hours of the invasion. Yet when the German High Command learned of the slaughter, the Nazis would later inflict brutal reprisals against entire Cretan villages. Malemi Airfield was the most vital asset on Crete, for whomever controlled the airfield would decide who controlled the island. Because of its critical importance, during the first day of battle, New Zealand troops successfully held the airfield. However, chronic confusion, poor communications, and dogged uncertainty about German troop strength plagued Allied commanders, especially Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Andrew, commander of the New Zealand 22nd Battalion, who was charged with defending the airfield, as well as Hill 107, which overlooked the runway and taxi lanes. Caused by disastrous gaps in field communication, Andrew came to believe that his companies on the far edges of the airfield had been overrun by German troops, leaving his companies on Hill 107 exposed and potentially surrounded. Fearing capture or worse, on the night of May 20th and 21st, Andrew ordered a retreat from Hill 107, a decision that would prove catastrophic to the battle. The result of his action came quickly at dawn on the 21st, when German transport planes began landing mountain troops and supplies at Malemi Airfield, despite substantial damage to the main runway. Throughout May 21st and 22nd, Allied forces launched determined counterattacks against Malemi Airfield and Hill 107, including the New Zealand 20th and Maori battalions, the companies that Andrew believed had fallen to the Germans on May the 20th. New Zealand and British units kept up their assault as more and more transport planes delivered German troops to fortify the Nazis' stronghold around the airfield. Yet the Allies' lack of coordination, artillery, and air support proved to be no match against a rising tide of Wehrmacht forces. For their part, the Germans experienced heavy losses due to their exposed position as German troops deplaned transport carriers. Despite their losses, the Germans ultimately consolidated their control of both the airfield and Hill 107 due to heavy German air support and concentrated artillery fire from increasingly dug-in positions, leading to the successful capture of the crucial island asset. Meanwhile, at Rethymno and Heraclium, German airborne assaults failed outright when paratroopers became isolated by Allied counterfire and civilian interdiction, and while both key German objectives handed Allied forces clear tactical victories within both sectors, the loss of Malemi Airfield and Hill 107 sealed Crete's fate to German occupation until the end of war in Europe. While the fighting raged ashore, the Royal Navy attempted to prevent German reinforcements from reaching Crete by sea when British warships intercepted Axis convoys in the Aegean Sea before sinking numerous troop transports and tow barges packed with men. Yet without air cover, the Royal Navy's warships were decimated by the Luftwaffe, who sank 9 warships and severely damaged 18 others, including the battle cruisers HMS Gloucester, Fiji, and Calcutta, and the destroyers HMS Kelly, Kashmir, Juno, Greyhound, Imperial, and Hereward, reducing the Royal Navy's Eastern Mediterranean strength to just 2 working battleships and 3 active cruisers. By May the 23rd through the 25th, German garrisons expanded outward from Malemi toward Hanya, making Allied positions increasingly untenable, while the Luftwaffe's dominance in the skies over Crete made daylight movement nearly impossible, at the same time worsening critical supply shortages of both food and ammunition. Recognizing that Crete could not be held, Freiburg ordered a general withdrawal on May 27th, which set off a brutal retreat to the southern coast, where the chance of a successful evacuation held the highest odds. Exhaustion, hunger, and confusion took their toll on Allied infantrymen who marched through mountainous terrain under constant air attack. Between May 28th and June the 1st, the Royal Navy conducted another perilous evacuation similar to the one at Dunkirk the year before, extracting some 16,000 troops from southern ports, while at least 12,000 were left behind to be made prisoners of war. At Heraclium, British troops fought their way to the port under intense bombing by the Luftwaffe, and while many were successfully evacuated, many others were captured when German forces overran the sector, leading to the end of organized Allied resistance on Crete on June 1st, 1941. The Battle of Crete proved to be one of the most costly victories Germany would ever achieve, including some 4,000 killed or missing, over 3,000 wounded, and more than 350 aircraft destroyed. The Fallschirmjäger suffered such egregious losses that Hitler reportedly forbade large-scale airborne operations for the remainder of the war. The Allies, in turn, suffered 4,123 killed or missing, 1,918 wounded, and 17,479 captured. Following the Battle of Crete, the island was placed under brutal German occupation, who carried out reprisals for battle-related and ongoing Cretan resistance, including the execution-style murders of more than 500 Cretans and the destruction of villages, including Kandanos in 1941, 20 villages in the Vianos region in 1943, and 9 in the Amari Valley in 1944, making the Battle of Crete a victory for the Nazis, paid in full with Aryan and Allied blood.